I teleported home one night with Ron and Sid and Meg. Ron stole Maggie's heart away, and I got Sydney's leg. So today's topic is teleportation, the ability to move instantly from one place to another. This is a concept that is very common in science fiction, but it's also very underutilized. Our goal today is to talk about some of the options sci-fi overlooks, and also to talk about some ways to do teleportation, or something similar, under known science. The concept was popularized by the Star Trek transporter as a way to avoid budget and time constraints of having the crew fly down in a shuttle. That necessary cost-saving measure got repeated in a lot of shows made before we had good CGI, like Blake 7, which was notoriously short on its budget. The problem it creates in a fictional environment was actually quite obvious to all those writers, but they didn't have much choice. And it definitely wasn't a secret. Even the earliest examples in fiction, like Fred T. Jane's 1897 novel To Venus in 5 Seconds, highlights the big problem of having teleportation technology in a sci-fi setting focused on spaceships. J.J. Abrams showed that in his rebooted Star Trek films, I'm guessing accidentally, by letting folks get transported over far larger distances, interstellar ones. The problem is, if you can transport folks over light years, you really don't have much need for spaceships, so of course most writers slapped in all sorts of range and condition constraints, along with a healthy amount of turning a blind eye to obvious alternative uses. Some authors have opted to go the teleportation route for interstellar travel instead of spaceships, and our Audible Book of the Month, Richard K. Morgan's Altered Carbon, is one such example. In that series, teleportation occurs by transmitting digital copies of the mind from place to place, with an awaiting body, one of our examples for today of how you could do teleportation inside known science. That book, which Netflix recently adapted into a TV show, explores a lot of the overlooked options and dilemmas with that approach, and you can pick up a free copy of Altered Carbon and also get a 30-day trial of Audible. Just use my link, audible.com/Isaac, or text Isaac to 500-500. We should start with that example though. Not all fictional teleporters work the same way, but a common approach in the digital age is to take a scan of an object, or a human, or just their mind, digitize it, and send it as a normal data transmission to some place where it will be replicated. There's obviously a lot of problems with this in terms of noise scrambling the signal or how you make the object on the other end, but folks tend to overlook just how much bandwidth is involved. You have about 10 to the 26 power atoms in every kilogram of your body. You'd probably need a kilobyte of data just to accurately record each atom type and isotope as it was, where it was positioned, what sort of bonds it has with its neighbors, and what the various electron energy states are. A person might weigh 100 kilograms, so you could be looking at as much as 10 to the 31 bytes of data, or 10 billion terabytes. Maximum bandwidth for a laser is inverse to its wavelength, and a 400 nanometer wavelength blue laser could do 200 terabits a second, so an even shorter wavelength UV laser might be able to send 10 to the 31 bytes in a mere 10 to the 17th seconds, or a few billion years. Obviously not a very fast way to travel. Now, just as obviously, we can compress the heck out of such a signal. Maybe you just do the gene sequences for each human cell and the brain state. Some physics students at the University of Leicester looked at that approach and got similarly huge transmission times, but even so, it's definite overkill. We have another problem too. If you want to make a copy of something at the quantum level, you effectively can't. Observing the energy of a particle means we cannot tell what its position was. Likewise, observing the position of a particle means we cannot tell what its momentum or kinetic energy was. To faithfully copy a particle, we need to know both the position and the energy of a particle, which is something that quantum theory says we can't do. This is a major problem when it comes to traditional teleportation that copies everything at the quantum level. But we probably don't need to take a copy of a teleported object down to the quantum level for us to achieve what arguably would still be considered to be teleportation. We really don't need the genetic information for each of your billions of fat cells, we just need maybe a few hundred. Of course, they won't be identical. The DNA in your cells mutates, so they won't all be the same, but we can send just those core bits to our receiver. After all, your fat cell DNA is pretty similar to most people's, so we only need to transmit the very tiny amounts of data varying from the main template. Nor do we care if your new body's fat cells match your old ones perfectly, including minor mutations. In fact, we probably would prefer not to have most of those. After all, if you are replicating folks cell by cell, why make a defective one when a functional one can be used instead? We only need that relatively tiny amount of data specific to your fat cells, and we don't need the full variation, along with the approximate amount of fat and where it was stored. Where fat is concerned, most folks won't mind if they arrive a little short either. And of course, you can do similar compression with the rest of the body's cells. Of course, this raises 3 key points. The first has to do with the underutilization of the technology in science fiction, the obvious medical example being removing damaged cells or cosmetically trimming weight off people. The second has to do with exactly how close a copy needs to be the real thing, and if a perfect copy even counts. The third has to do with what happens to the remaining thing, or person, you just copied. The same as we have with brain uploading, as it's essentially a copy and paste, not a cut and paste situation. When you're done, the original object or person is still there. What do you do with them now? Let's take those in order. Typically, sci-fi bypasses the medical applications implied by this sort of teleportation, though writers will often play with it for an episode, then subsequently everyone conveniently forgets that option. Probably a good idea too, considering its implications. If you didn't already zoom in on those implications, it happens to be automatic immortality. Got a virus or disease? Just transport the person and leave the viral cells behind, or just lock onto those and yank them out. Age-damaged cells? Transport them away or teleport the person but replace them with healthy ones on the re-render. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, replace all those bits. Total vaporization, just use a stored copy of their most recent scan. This still has some of the issues we discussed for extreme lifespans and mind uploading in the Digital Death episode. It doesn't truly grant immortality, just ridiculously long average lifetimes, but we are talking millions or billions of years, not centuries. That second issue, though, can interfere with this, the one asking how good a copy needs to be to count as the real thing, and if it even can. This dates all the way back to the ship of Theseus, a thought problem and one we discussed before in the episode Consciousness and Identity a couple years back. Theseus, the fellow from Greek mythology who killed the Minotaur and escaped the labyrinth to sail home, did so on a ship that was allegedly preserved at Athens in memory of him. When Plutarch wrote about this, he noted how every time a plank or timber got old, they'd replace it with a new one, until the ship had not a single remaining original part. Philosophers argued over whether this meant it was the same ship or not, and it's a conversation that's kept folks busy arguing all the way up to modern times. Parallel examples would be the grandfather's axe, where a man has replaced the handle of the axe many times and even the axe head, and asks if it is really the same one his grandfather used. Another example would be rivers. A river not only constantly changes the water in it, but even changes its path and shape. Even Marvin, the paranoid android, from Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, from which we also got our opening quote for this episode, refers to this. In that, Marvin remarks that between time travel and getting left to wait for his companions, he is actually older than the universe itself and has had every part of himself replaced many times, except the aching diodes down his left-hand side. This issue is complicated since even before modern biology, folks knew that people ate for fuel and for materials, since they gained size as they grew and gained and lost weight routinely. Nowadays, we know everything gets replaced. You still have some of the atoms you had as a kid, a few random ones that coincidentally stuck around, or even left you to become part of some plant and ended up back in you when you ate it, but it's minimal and irrelevant. Nor is there some precise body template you stick to. Your exact structure constantly bounces around a basic template that alters over time from aging, damage, and decay. Even your brain is constantly changing. Every new memory we create alters the mind, which impacts the way you think forever. Nowadays, short of a soul, It's pretty much the only thing we have left that we can think of as some essential quality that is core to our identity. If you're moving your mind or brain pattern around between bodies, identity presumably moves as well, be it into an android or into some cloned body or even into some other body, as is the case with Altered Carbon, where folks often change bodies and start calling them sleeves instead, with the conscious mind moving between hard drives implanted in the body. Interestingly, this means you basically don't need the actual brain, and you can make a pretty good argument all those sleeves are really just androids, regardless of how organic they are. It also means you don't have to transfer to a body. You could just make an extra copy in one instead, so that 2 of you were walking around, or 3 or 4 or 40 billion. Which brings up a third issue with this style of teleportation. What do you do with the extra copy left behind? As I mentioned, we have this same problem with mind uploading. You get your brain scanned into a machine and blink when it's done, wondering if it didn't work, just to see your digital copy waving back from a monitor and saying you both need to sit down with a lawyer to discuss who owns what and who the kids should be calling mommy or daddy. You are still there, just now there's 2 of you. In the Outer Limits episode Think Like a Dinosaur, an advanced saurian species facilitates human teleportation to their homeworld, after which they must balance the equation by destroying the original subject, Kamala. However, something goes wrong this time and the original remains. While awaiting news of her teleportation results, Kamala's human minder develops feelings for her, and when confirmation is received, balancing the equation seems more like an execution. Star Trek played with this concept too, in the episode Second Chances, where a then Lieutenant Riker beamed down to a planet, and when they beamed him up, the transporter signal bounced back, leaving an extra copy of him marooned for many years on that planet, while the other one returned to duty. Credit to the series, they actually brought the copy back for a later episode in Deep Space Nine's Defiant, as opposed to forgetting entirely about the setting-breaking piece of technology as they normally do, though they do conveniently forget him after that. Still, 2 very good episodes in the Trek franchise. Anyway, since they know what caused it, and indeed the implication is that they always knew how to do it intentionally if they wanted to, it sort of messes with every single death they have since they could just copy people from their last saved pattern. You don't want to be able to resurrect folks this way at will, or have to deal with leftover copies, so authors usually have some sort of handwave to deal with it, like the original being vaporized by the sheer energy needed to scan that accurately. But since we don't live in a sci-fi novel, it's an issue we need to consider for this type of teleportation. A common suggestion is just to vaporize the person anyway, as in that Outer Limits episode, even if the scan doesn't do that. But even with their permission, this seems a pretty dubious ethical stance, skating on some very thin ice with murder below. Don't assume a court would regard resource scarcity and necessity as a factor for precedent either. Putting it bluntly, while it often gets ignored, the amount of energy needed to transport someone's signal this way is generally going to massively exceed what you'd need to support the original for the rest of their life anyway. At the end of the day, I suspect this type of teleportation would end up involving an android on the other side, ideally a very good simulacra, able to do some cosmetic alteration to look like the replicated person uploaded to it, who goes and does whatever they are being sent there for, while the other person either sleeps or goes into stasis back home, so as to experience no subjective time, and then those memories get integrated back into the original mind. Done right, you might even be able to integrate them comfortably back into their awareness, even as they experience things in their original body, so they could have copies of themselves coming back from doing all sorts of things, climbing mountains, traveling to new worlds, learning whole new fields, etc. That still leaves the issue of what to do with the data in that android though, which is arguably still a person, but it at least feels a little bit less like murder or suicide to wipe that hard drive. This tends to be the most common type of teleportation in fiction these days, as it does safely fall into accepted physics. The other common one is usually some variation of a handwave on quantum teleportation, so let's talk about that next. Quantum teleportation, like quantum entanglement in general, has been horribly abused in sci-fi in recent years. See the quantum entanglement episode for clarification on that in general and its essential uselessness for faster-than-light travel or communication. Quantum teleportation doesn't permit FTL travel either. The first thing to note is that when you quantum teleport some atoms, you are not actually moving them at all. You are copying their data onto some other atoms. Take a box full of atoms and quantum teleport them outside that box, and you've still got that box full of atoms. In that respect, it's a lot like our last example of transmitting the data. It does happen to be destructive by its nature though, which removes the remnant copy issue. When you measure all those atoms, you change their state so the new atoms get the copy of the original while the original changes. You can get many atoms entangled together and teleport, or copy if you prefer, the whole state onto something else. There is no theoretical limit on how much can be entangled together, but keep in mind quantum entanglement is core to how quantum computers work too, and even getting 100 or 1,000 entangled in very controlled and artificial circumstances is the best we've done, and you've got billions of trillions of times more atoms in you. This is the nicer technological handwave if you want teleportation that is a perfect copy you can't alter if you wanted to. There's no obvious range limits either, but again, it is not FTL. This is also the sort of approach that works well for moving through time or to alternate universes, as it doesn't violate conservation of mass and energy, though would still presumably violate entropy and cause temporal paradoxes. Jump back in time conventionally, and you have the issue that the time you left is suddenly missing mass, and the time you went to just gained it. That's not an issue when you're just copying the state, rather than moving the matter itself. Another option is a little more like a wormhole. Indeed, it's essentially the same concept. You take a chunk of space and just move it along with everything in it, but not directly through space, into a wormhole or a quick jump into hyperspace or whatever. This approach we obviously can't go into the science of much, see the wormholes episode for discussion of them specifically, but it's nice since it involves no concern over copying. But we have a somewhat similar brute force trick for this. Even limiting yourself to light speed, you can't move someone across a planet in an eye blink because their body couldn't handle the acceleration. We encountered that same problem when discussing space warfare in terms of ships accelerating to dodge, or create a large window of positional uncertainty for folks shooting at them. Move or even turn a ship too fast, and you turn the crew into pancakes. However, one very high-tech approach that doesn't actually violate any physical laws at least, would be to have little nanomachines inside someone basically pad all their cells against acceleration by ripping them apart at the cellular level, and move the big cloud of disassembled cells to reassemble them elsewhere. I think the only place I've seen this trick was in Alastair Reynolds' novel Pushing Ice, and if you can do it, then you have a great method of moving around planets very quickly. And you would just seem to puff from one place to another, since those machines, assuming they have the energy for it, can probably handle thousands of G-force. You might ask why you couldn't just do this at the atomic or at least molecular level, but keep in mind there is energy involved in ripping things apart. Your cells don't really have a lot of binding energy between them compared to all the energy holding your molecules or atoms together. Discussions of teleportation often worry about what happens if you beam directly into the side of a mountain, for instance, which ought to cause a sudden pressure increase there that's more than modestly explosive, or even just pressure differences when you teleport down to some planet where the air pressure is less and suddenly your ears pop and you cough from the higher pressure in your lungs. Keep in mind though, that ripping things apart at the atomic level, especially quickly, involves a ton of energy that needs to be dissipated somehow. That's less of an issue for that cell encapsulation method we just discussed, but those bots pillowing and moving your cells still need energy to move. Neat method though, and it kinda makes you like the T-1000 from Terminator 2, as you could go sliding through cracks and doors. You could potentially maintain consciousness through that if those bots encapsulating your brain cells were reading and mimicking the normal neuron connections for you, and you might opt to exist like this all the time, only holding to human form rather than vapor out of a personal preference. After all, we often talk about transhumans having nanobots all throughout their body anyway. Another method that doesn't technically violate physics, even if we have no idea how to do it currently, would be very parallel to one of the weapons we discussed back in space warfare, the meson beam. Mesons, particularly the kind called the neutral pion, can fly through normal matter uninterrupted before decaying rather explosively, so they make a good bunker buster or armor penetrator weapon. Same as neutrinos, they don't really interact with anything either, nor presumably does dark matter, but the difference in this case is that mesons are made up of normal quarks, same as protons and neutrons are, whereas neutrinos are not, and dark matter almost certainly isn't either. Regardless of which weakly interacting particle one uses though, if you could turn some normal matter into some other non-interacting matter temporarily and set to decay back into that normal matter at a specific time, or a specific distance based on its velocity and time before decaying, then you could presumably beam right through any material. Two caveats. First, we have no idea how to do that. And second, mesons, like most particles with half-lives, do not magically decay at exactly that half-life. That's just how long it takes on average for half of them to do so. That's fine for a gun, but not for reassembling a complex object. If you had some sort of field that caused the decay when they hit, then maybe you could do it precisely. Of course, that also implies a pretty obvious defense against unwelcome visitors too. There are many more methods proposed over the years, from the vaguely plausible to the downright silly, but those are the core methods that fit more or less into known science, with some obviously doing so better than others. Let's take a minute to discuss some other options folks often overlook. We pointed out that teleportation has some obvious medical uses for surgery or disease control or damaged cells. We also know that you could use it cosmetically, to remove fat for instance. Sounds a bit vain and lazy, but it's not nearly as lazy as, for instance, having a teleporter that locks onto your bladder or intestines to save you a walk to the bathroom, or using one to clean off sweat and grime and dead skin cells. It's also got some industrial applications too. Tons. You can use it to assemble objects like the Star Trek replicator does, or to move around matter, heat, and energy in general. You don't stop at the gas station, it just teleports more fuel in as you go by, for instance, though one would wonder why you need a car in such a case. But it would work for your lawnmower, or even the batteries in your cell phone potentially. However, it isn't just for making things, you can move them too. You no longer need a hammer or two in every household that most folks use a few minutes a year. Instead, you wiggle your fingers the right way to tell your home computer what you want, and it teleports a hammer to you from the local communal tool shed, which probably only needs a dozen hammers for several thousand people. In this way, a teleporter can work a lot like hammer space, something we see in fiction and a lot from the old cartoons. It takes its name from those old cartoons where a character could pull a hammer out of seemingly nowhere and hit another character with it, like the TARDIS from Doctor Who, that's bigger on the inside than it looks. There's a joke about most older action films having gun magazines in hammer space because they never seem to run out of bullets, but a teleporter could achieve the same functional end. All of which emphasizes the weird and unexpected uses it can be put to that a lot of writers skip seeing or examining with this and other technologies, and our Audible Book of the Month, Altered Carbon, does a good job looking at many of those, particularly in terms of possible effects on our psychology and civilization. Richard K. Morgan's 2002 novel is also a fascinating detective novel with that cyberpunk film noir flavor we see in a lot of works like Blade Runner. Lots of examination of some of the implications, including some very dark ones, of what happens when folks can move their minds between bodies or exist entirely in virtual reality. The book has a couple sequels too, and does differ noticeably from its Netflix adaptation, if you've already seen that. And same as for January's book, Jurassic Park, I tend to feel the books are almost always better than the film or show adaptations. And you can pick up a free copy of that audiobook today. Just use my link in this episode's description, audible.com/Isaac, or text Isaac to 500-500 to get a free book and a 30-day free trial. And that book is yours to keep whether you stay on with Audible or not. I think you will find Altered Carbon is an intriguing novel, but if you don't like it, you can swap it out for another at any time. Next week we will be looking at a technology that is already having a huge impact on our civilization and will only keep growing as we explore advanced metamaterials. For alerts when that and other episodes come out, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button and share it with others. Until next time, thanks for watching, and have a great week.